At 11:47 p.m. on a humid Thursday night, Claire Thompson walked out of the Hawthorne Inn, her face lit by a faint, almost triumphant smile. The surveillance footage captured every step she took into the darkness. Unaware that dozens of lives had already been altered forever because of her, the tip came through an anonymous call. "You need to look into her. She's not who she says she is." Within hours, police pieced together a disturbing pattern. Men across the city testing positive for HIV, all with one thing in common: a mysterious young woman they had met just once. The investigation revealed more questions than answers. How did no one notice? Why did the infections seem targeted? And most chilling of all, was she working alone? Outside the hotel, the air was thick, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. Across town, emergency rooms filled with confusion, anger, and fear, men bewildered, their lives shattered by an invisible hand. And Claire, seemingly so ordinary, so harmless, had already moved on to her next destination. But the truth about what led her here was far darker than anyone could imagine. Before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Join a community that uncovers the hidden truths others are too afraid to tell. New stories, shocking twists, and raw emotions every single week. Don't miss what's coming next. Be part of something unforgettable. Claire Thompson grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Savannah, Georgia. From an early age, her life was governed by strict rules and high expectations. Her parents, deeply religious and respected figures within the community, believed in discipline, modesty, and the power of prayer. Sundays were reserved for church, weekdays for school and chores. Claire, with her soft brown hair and wide, searching eyes, learned to live within these invisible walls, careful not to disappoint. She was the kind of girl teachers praised, polite, diligent, always sitting in the front row. Friends, however, were a rare luxury. Claire's sheltered upbringing left her awkward at making connections. Most of her evenings were spent helping her mother prepare dinner or curled up with a book, while her peers went to parties she was never allowed to attend. Despite her isolated world, Claire harbored quiet dreams of independence. She often fantasized about life beyond the town's sleepy borders, imagining herself walking the bustling streets of big cities where nobody knew her name. Her walls weren't built out of fear of the world. They were constructed by years of other people's expectations, leaving her desperate to taste freedom for herself. At 19, Claire earned a scholarship to a local university. It was supposed to be her first real step toward autonomy. She moved into a small dorm room on campus, still close enough for weekly dinners at home, but far enough to breathe new air. For the first time, she could make her own choices, and with that came both excitement and fear. Claire remained cautious at first. She went to classes, studied hard, and kept her head down. But college life buzzed around her, groups laughing on the quad, late-night pizza deliveries, impromptu trips to the beach. She watched it all from a distance, an outsider peeking into a world she'd been warned about but never truly experienced. Everything about her appearance spoke of innocence. She wore modest clothes, kept her hair in simple braids or ponytails, and hardly ever wore makeup. Yet beneath that careful exterior, a silent rebellion was brewing. A yearning to be seen, to be chosen, to belong. Claire's closest bond was with Rebecca Lewis, her roommate. Rebecca was everything Claire was not, bold, outgoing, and unafraid to challenge authority. It was Rebecca who first coaxed Claire into attending a college party, a decision that would tilt her life on an irreversible axis. Claire's vulnerability wasn't just emotional. It was deeply rooted in her longing for human connection. She wanted to trust, to be loved without conditions. But in a world she barely understood, surrounded by people who didn't share her sheltered background, Claire was woefully unprepared for the dangers that awaited. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her need for freedom and acceptance would soon collide head first with betrayal. A betrayal so profound that it would ignite a fire inside her, a fire that would consume not only her own future, but the futures of many others. For the first few months at university, Claire Thompson lived cautiously, as if tiptoeing around an invisible minefield. She attended classes diligently, kept her dorm room meticulously clean, and dutifully called her parents every Sunday night. Her life felt safe, structured, but underneath that polished surface, an unrelenting hunger stirred. Claire wanted more. More than schedules and silent prayers, more than being the girl who was always reliable but never remembered. She wanted to be seen, to feel alive, to write a story different from the one her parents had mapped out for her since birth. The pressure built quietly inside her. It grew with every glimpse she caught of her classmates laughing under the oak trees, sprawled on picnic blankets, tossing frisbees without a care. It intensified when she watched Rebecca leave for parties in dazzling dresses Claire wouldn't dare to wear. It simmered when she scrolled through social media, watching others live lives she could only imagine. By the time spring semester arrived, Claire was desperate for something to change. She yearned to shed the suffocating identity of the good girl and step, even just once, into the unknown. She wanted freedom, passion, spontaneity. She wanted to live her own life, not one dictated by others' expectations. One Friday evening, Rebecca returned to their dorm room, brimming with excitement. "There's a party at the Hawthorne house tonight," she said, tossing her bag onto the bed. "Everyone's going. You should come." Claire hesitated. Parties were forbidden territory. Reckless, dangerous. Her parents' warnings echoed in her mind. Alcohol, strangers, mistakes you could never undo. But something in her cracked that night. Maybe it was the monotony of her routine. Maybe it was the loneliness she carried like a second skin. Or maybe it was the simple, human desire to finally belong. "I'll think about it," she mumbled. But deep down she already knew she would go. Rebecca beamed. "It'll be fun, I promise. You deserve a night off." For hours, Claire agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple yet flattering outfit. Modest by any standard, but rebellious enough to make her feel different. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, her heart hammering with fear and exhilaration. As they approached the Hawthorne house, Claire's nerves buzzed under her skin. Music thumped through the ground. Laughter and shouting spilled out from the open doors. Lights flashed like beacons, welcoming her into a world she had only observed from afar. The moment she stepped inside, a strange alchemy occurred. The scent of beer, sweat, and cheap cologne hung heavy in the air. Bodies pressed close together, a kaleidoscope of movement and sound. Claire clung to Rebecca at first, shrinking into the background, but her initial panic began to dissolve as she took it all in. Someone handed her a drink, a plastic cup filled with something sweet and burning. She hesitated, then took a cautious sip. It was awful, but it made her feel braver. Within minutes, she was swept up into conversations with people whose names she instantly forgot. She laughed at jokes she barely understood. She danced awkwardly in the corner of the living room, and for the first time in her life she felt normal. Invisible barriers she had built over years began to crumble. That's when she saw him. Across the crowded room, a tall, confident figure leaned against the kitchen doorway. Ethan Black. His presence was magnetic, his dark eyes scanning the party lazily until they landed on her. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. Claire felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her. Ethan approached with easy charm. His voice was smooth, his questions disarming. Unlike the others, he listened when she spoke. He laughed at her nervous jokes. He made her feel interesting, wanted, even special. Hours blurred together. One drink turned into 2, then 3. Claire's laughter grew freer, her worries dulled. When Ethan suggested they go somewhere quieter, she barely hesitated. She was intoxicated. By the alcohol, yes, but more so by the idea that someone like him could choose someone like her. They left the party and wandered the quiet streets, talking about everything and nothing. The world around them melted away, and for once, Claire stopped thinking about consequences. Under the golden haze of streetlights, Ethan took her hand. Claire squeezed it back. ignoring the small voice in her head begging her to be careful. That night, Claire crossed a threshold she couldn't return from. She didn't know it yet, but her deepest desire to belong, to be loved, to live, would lead her down a path so dark it would swallow everything she had once been, and it all started with a simple yes. The morning after the party, Claire Thompson woke up with a pounding headache and a swirling confusion she couldn't shake. The sunlight slicing through her dorm window felt too bright, too harsh, as if it was exposing secrets she wasn't ready to face. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. "You looked so happy last night. Ethan is totally into you." Claire reread the message several times, a flutter of excitement blooming in her chest. Could it be real? Could someone like Ethan, so confident, so worldly, truly be interested in someone like her? Over the next few days, she clung to that possibility. She waited anxiously for a text, a call, any sign from him, but the silence stretched unbearably. She messaged him once, casual, careful, and received only a single, curt reply hours later. "Busy. Talk soon." The sinking feeling began then. Still, she refused to lose hope. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he just needed time. Claire replayed their night together in her mind like a cherished movie reel, clinging to every smile, every glance, every word he had said that made her feel alive. But the dream began to unravel quickly. Within a week, Claire started feeling unwell. At first it was easy to dismiss. Fatigue, a fever, maybe stress. But the symptoms grew worse. Night sweats, unexplained weight loss, a persistent nagging cold she couldn't shake. Rebecca noticed. "Girl, you look awful," she said, tossing a granola bar onto Claire's desk. "You should go to the campus clinic." Claire brushed it off. She didn't want to be the girl who overreacted. She told herself it was nothing, that everything would sort itself out. But deep down, a gnawing fear had already taken root. When the dizziness became too much to ignore, Claire finally made an appointment. She sat in the sterile waiting room, twisting the hem of her sleeve between her fingers, feeling like a child awaiting punishment. Dr. Samuel Adams, a kind-faced man in his early 50s, was professional but gentle. He ordered a series of routine tests, assuring her it was probably just a lingering flu. Claire clung to his optimism like a life raft. Days later, she was called back in. She sat on the examination table, swinging her legs nervously as Dr. Adams entered with a clipboard in hand. His expression was different this time, tighter, more somber. "I'm afraid the results are not what we hoped for," he said carefully. "You tested positive for HIV." For a moment, Claire thought she had misheard him. The world seemed to tilt sideways, and all the air rushed out of the room. She stared at him, uncomprehending, as the words sank deeper, anchoring themselves into her very bones. HIV. Her. It didn't make sense. She had only ever been with Ethan. One night. One man. Tears blurred her vision. Her hands trembled uncontrollably as Dr. Adams explained next steps. Specialists, medications, treatment plans. But Claire couldn't focus. All she could think about was Ethan's smile, the way he had kissed her forehead so tenderly, the way he had pulled her into his world, only to leave her infected, broken. In the days that followed, Claire's world collapsed inward. She barely left her dorm room. She ignored Rebecca's concerned knocks. She stopped answering calls from home. Shame wrapped around her like a second skin, heavier and more suffocating with each passing hour. And then, one evening, while scrolling through an anonymous campus forum, she saw a thread titled, "Ethan Black, Stay Away." Dozens of posts, dozens of women, all telling the same story. Ethan knew. He knew he was HIV positive, and he had slept with them anyway. No protection, no warning, no guilt. Claire felt sick to her stomach. Rage and betrayal ignited inside her like wildfire. She had been a target, a conquest, a means to an end for a man who viewed her life as disposable. In that moment, something inside Claire snapped. The naivety that had carried her through life, the belief that people were inherently good, that the world was fair, disintegrated completely. If Ethan could move through life destroying others without consequence, why should she be the one left bleeding in silence? Pain demanded to be heard. And somewhere, in the darkest corners of her mind, a terrible idea began to take shape. An idea that whispered of control, of power, of revenge. Claire Thompson, the once shy girl who only wanted to belong, would no longer be invisible. If the world wanted to take from her, she would take something back. And so, with her heart fractured and her future burning to ashes around her, Claire made a decision that would forever alter not only her fate, but the lives of dozens of unsuspecting strangers. The days following Claire's discovery felt like a slow death. She walked the campus in a daze, invisible to everyone around her, yet convinced that somehow they knew. Every glance, every whisper in the hallway seemed loaded with judgment, even if it wasn't. Inside, Claire crumbled. She barely ate, barely slept. Nights were the worst. Endless hours alone with her spiraling thoughts, playing and replaying the moment Dr. Adams had delivered the news. Over and over, she blamed herself. Her body felt foreign, as if it had betrayed her. The very skin she once thought of as her own now seemed like a weapon turned inward, and yet Ethan Black walked free. Laughing, flirting, moving effortlessly through the same campus that had become her personal hell. One afternoon, Claire spotted him across the quad. He was standing with a group of friends, flashing that same lazy grin he had used on her. He didn't even notice her. She was just another casualty, faceless, forgettable. The realization struck her like a physical blow. He didn't care. He never had. The humiliation festered into something more corrosive, something darker. That night, sitting alone in the small dorm room she once thought symbolized freedom, Claire made a decision. She opened her laptop, hands trembling slightly, and created a new identity. Amber Fields. A fake name, a fake persona, crafted to be alluring but not suspicious. She uploaded a carefully chosen profile picture, not overtly sexual, but suggestive enough to attract attention. She filled in minimal information, young, adventurous, looking for connections. She even added a quote about living life without regrets. Within hours, messages began pouring in. Men of all kinds, single, married, divorced. Some were shy and respectful, others were bold, crude, and entitled. Claire read each one carefully, studying them like a predator choosing prey. She wasn't interested in love or validation anymore. She wasn't looking for connection. She was looking for power. Her first target was James Collins, a 36-year-old accountant who confessed after just 2 days of messaging that he was married but needed a little excitement. Claire arranged to meet him at a downtown hotel, choosing a place where anonymity was guaranteed. When she arrived, James was already there, nervously adjusting his tie in the dimly lit bar. Claire approached with a smile. Not her real smile, but the one Amber Fields would wear. The encounter was mechanical. James was clumsy, eager, easily manipulated. Claire guided the night with chilling precision, making sure no barriers were used, whispering reassurances when he hesitated. When it was over, James fell asleep almost immediately, snoring softly under the cheap hotel sheets. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him. This was not what she had imagined revenge would feel like. There was no satisfaction, no sense of justice, only a hollow, gnawing emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. Still, she got dressed, wiped her fingerprints from every surface she had touched, and slipped out into the night. In the following weeks, Claire perfected her methods. She created more fake profiles under different names: Madison Clark, Emily Rhodes, Sarah Banks, each persona tailored slightly depending on the type of man she was targeting. She developed a script: flirt, build trust, arrange a meeting, ensure no protection was used, and then disappear. No names, no follow-ups, no regrets. Each encounter blurred into the next. Faces, hotel rooms, whispered promises. All became meaningless noise in Claire's descent into darkness. But despite her calculated approach, Claire wasn't immune to the toll it was taking on her. Her reflection in the mirror became more unfamiliar each day. Dark circles bloomed under her eyes, her once bright gaze dulled to a lifeless stare. The guilt crept in sometimes. In quiet moments she couldn't drown out, but she shoved it down with cold efficiency. She told herself it was justice, that these men deserved it, that they were complicit in their own downfall because they chose deceit over honesty. In her mind, she wasn't the villain. She was the reckoning. Claire kept meticulous records, hidden deep within an encrypted folder on her laptop. Names, dates, small details about each man. It gave her a grim sense of control, of order in the chaos she was creating. And all the while, around the campus and beyond, whispers grew louder. Stories began surfacing. Men, terrified and confused, quietly visiting clinics, online forums buzzing with rumors about a black widow luring men to their doom. The campus health center saw a sharp spike in students seeking confidential testing. Still, Claire pressed on. Her world narrowed to a single focus, the mission. There was no space left for friendships, dreams, or hope. The only thing that mattered was balancing the scales, even if it meant burning herself down in the process. By the end of the semester, more than 30 men had unknowingly crossed paths with Amber Fields. And with every encounter, Claire felt herself slip further away from the person she once had been. What she couldn't see, not yet, was that the walls were already closing in. And soon, the facade she had so carefully built would begin to crack, with devastating consequences. The ripple effects of Claire's silent war spread faster than she could have anticipated. At first, the changes were subtle. A whisper here, a panicked glance there. Students who once carried themselves with careless arrogance now seemed jittery, paranoid. Some of the men she had targeted started disappearing from the usual social scenes altogether, while others suddenly became advocates for safe encounters, posting vague warnings on anonymous campus forums. But as summer approached, the storm that had been gathering in the distance finally broke. One by one, men began coming forward, not publicly, but through confidential complaints to the University Health Center and later to the police. Their stories were eerily similar. Meeting a captivating young woman online, engaging in a whirlwind night of passion, and then receiving devastating medical news weeks later. The authorities initially struggled to piece it together. There was no name, no clear description, only fragments of different aliases. Amber, Madison, Emily. Each version of Claire was slightly different, carefully crafted to be forgettable, yet enticing. Still, the patterns were impossible to ignore. Rumors of an intentional spreader tore through the city like wildfire. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, sensationalizing it with headlines like "Mysterious Woman Infects Dozens, Police Search for Answers." Fear infected the community faster than any virus could. Students withdrew from classes. Bars and clubs saw sharp declines in attendance. Parents pulled their children from dorms mid-semester, horrified at what was unfolding. The university, desperate to protect its reputation, issued vague warnings about heightened health concerns without naming specifics. But by then, everyone knew. The city was gripped by a paranoia that turned friends into suspects and lovers into threats. Claire, meanwhile, watched the chaos she had created with a numb sort of detachment. She knew the storm would eventually reach her doorstep. It had to. But for now, she was invisible, hiding in plain sight among the same crowds she had once longed to join. Every interaction she witnessed, every hug between friends, every shy flirtation at a coffee shop, felt foreign to her now. She was no longer part of their world. She was something else entirely, a ghost haunting the edges of normalcy, a living reminder that trust could be fatal. The emotional toll mounted in ways she hadn't anticipated. Claire found herself plagued by nightmares, twisted, feverish visions of the faces of the men she had targeted, their mouths moving soundlessly in accusations she couldn't bear to hear. She woke, gasping in the darkness, drenched in sweat, the weight of her actions pressing down harder with each passing day. Her body began to betray her as well. She grew thinner, her once healthy glow replaced by a hollow pallor. Simple tasks became exhausting. Conversations were labored. Even breathing sometimes felt like a conscious effort. She stopped going to classes altogether, ignoring emails from professors and concerned messages from Rebecca. Her dorm room transformed into a prison cell lined with silence and regret. And yet, part of her refused to stop. Part of her clung desperately to the original justification. They deserved it. They were complicit. I'm just the consequence. But in the rare moments of brutal honesty, Claire couldn't ignore a deeper truth. Not every man she had targeted was like Ethan. Some were just lonely. Some were foolish. Some were simply human, seeking connection in a world that often felt unbearably cold. The realization gnawed at her. It blurred the black and white morality she had clung to at the start of her mission, replacing it with an endless grey void she couldn't navigate. She tried to suppress those doubts by focusing on logistics, rotating her profiles more frequently, using different meetup spots, avoiding familiar faces. But the strain was visible now. Every new encounter felt heavier, like carrying a stone she could no longer bear. The breaking point came one evening when Claire met Derek Williams. Unlike the others, Derek was sweet, almost painfully so. He fumbled over his words, blushed when she laughed at his jokes, treated her with a tenderness she hadn't realized she missed. Something inside her cracked open. For the first time since this spiral began, Claire hesitated. She found herself prolonging their conversations, wanting to know more about him instead of rushing to the inevitable conclusion. When Derek spoke about his dreams, modest, earnest dreams of building a life he could be proud of, Claire felt a pang of something she thought she had lost forever: hope. But with hope came crushing guilt. She didn't deserve someone like Derek. She didn't deserve forgiveness or redemption. Still, the encounter left a scar she couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, Claire tried to push it aside, tried to continue her crusade with the same cold efficiency. But it wasn't the same anymore. The hollow victories rang even emptier, and somewhere deep inside, she knew she couldn't keep doing this. The walls were closing in. The faces she had hurt, the lives she had altered, loomed larger in her mind every day, and even though she hadn't been caught yet, Claire understood that no amount of clever disguises could hide the truth forever. The real damage, the irreversible, soul-shattering damage, wasn't just happening to them. It was happening to her too, and no amount of revenge could ever make her whole again. If this story is stirring something inside you, a memory, a question, a feeling you can't quite name, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Sometimes healing begins just by speaking what's been hidden too long. The first real crack in Claire Thompson's carefully built armor appeared one quiet afternoon at a corner cafe, tucked away from the noise of downtown. She had agreed to meet Derek Williams again, against her better judgment. She told herself it was part of her act. Another encounter to be executed, another name to add to her growing list. But it didn't feel that way. Derek greeted her with a shy smile, a coffee in each hand, and an apology for being late. He was so earnest, so genuinely kind, that Claire found herself smiling back before she could stop it. They sat by the window, sipping coffee and talking about nothing of consequence. Books they loved, music they hated, childhood memories. Derek listened in a way that made Claire feel visible, not as a conquest or a mistake, but as a person. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Claire lowered her guard. She wasn't Amber Fields today. She wasn't Madison or Emily or Sarah. She was just Claire, the girl who once dreamed of cities and adventures, who once believed she could build a life filled with meaning and trust. Hours passed unnoticed. When they parted ways, Derek walked her to the bus stop, hesitating before finally asking if he could see her again. Claire froze. 1,000 warnings screamed in her mind. She had no right to accept, no right to let him in. but against every instinct she had honed for survival. She nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'd like that." In the days that followed, Claire's world shifted almost imperceptibly. Her obsession with hunting new targets dulled. She spent more time texting Derek, laughing at his bad jokes, meeting him for coffee dates that stretched into late-night conversations. She started to remember what it felt like to exist without a secret agenda, and that terrified her, because with each new memory they created, Claire's shame grew heavier. She was living a lie, and Derek didn't deserve it. Still, the fear of losing this small piece of normalcy kept her paralyzed. Meanwhile, outside her fragile bubble, the investigation intensified. Detective Linda Carter had been assigned to the growing case that now had over 40 reported victims. The police knew they were dealing with a serial offender, but progress was slow. Victims provided only vague descriptions, unreliable at best after nights clouded with alcohol and blurred memories. However, one breakthrough came unexpectedly. One victim, a married man named James Collins, had secretly recorded parts of his encounter. His guilt afterward had driven him to save every scrap of evidence he could. When the detectives reviewed the footage, they noticed a distinct detail. A small tattoo on the woman's wrist, partially hidden by a bracelet, a tiny constellation of stars. The video wasn't clear enough to identify a face, but the tattoo was something real, something to chase. Flyers went up around campus, discreet but chilling. Anonymous tips started flooding in, and one of those tips pointed to Claire Thompson, a girl who matched the general description. A girl who had recently withdrawn from classes, isolated herself from friends, and appeared increasingly unstable. Detective Carter didn't act immediately. She started watching Claire, parking across from her dorm, following her movements, documenting her behaviors. Claire remained oblivious, too tangled in her emotional conflict to notice the growing noose around her neck, until one night, when everything began to fall apart. Claire met Derek at the riverfront park, a quiet place they had claimed as their own little sanctuary. They sat on the bench, sharing a bag of French fries and laughing under the fading purple sky. At one point, Derek pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small bracelet he had made from braided cords. "I know it's dumb," he said, flushing with embarrassment, "but I thought maybe you'd like it." Claire stared at it, her throat tightening. The gesture was so pure, so innocent, it hurt. She reached out to take it, and as she did, Derek's fingers brushed her wrist, briefly pushing up her sleeve. He froze, his eyes locked onto the tattoo. Claire pulled away instinctively, yanking her sleeve down, but it was too late. Derek's face shifted from warmth to confusion to something more guarded. "Claire," he said slowly, "where did you get that tattoo?" Panic clawed at her chest. "It's nothing," she whispered, forcing a shaky laugh. "Just something I got on a whim." But she saw the seed of doubt take root in his mind. That night, after Derek walked her home in tense silence, Claire knew the fragile world she had built was crumbling. She could feel the invisible line connecting Derek to the investigators, a line that would soon snap taut and drag everything she had tried to hide into the blinding light. And deep down, Claire understood something even more devastating. She didn't just fear being caught. She feared losing Derek, the one person who had made her remember what it felt like to be human again. The days following that night at the riverfront felt heavier than any Claire Thompson had ever known. Every text from Derek became shorter. Every call she placed went unanswered. The growing silence between them gnawed at her more viciously than any accusation ever could. She knew without asking, Derek was pulling away. Whether out of suspicion, fear, or disappointment, she didn't know. And maybe it didn't matter, because deep down, Claire had already condemned herself. Meanwhile, Detective Linda Carter intensified the investigation. After weeks of slow progress, the identification of Claire Thompson as a primary suspect gave the department new urgency. Surveillance footage from hotels, online dating activity, and matching timelines all began to form an undeniable pattern. Carter's team connected the dots methodically, aliases Claire had used, locations she had frequented, and the chilling timeline of reported infections. There was enough for a warrant, but Carter wanted more. She needed a confession, a way to seal the case so tightly that no jury could doubt it. She decided to set a trap. The plan was simple: a controlled meeting, an undercover officer posing as a potential target, capture everything: the approach, the seduction, the attempt. It was risky. If Claire sensed anything was off, she could disappear, but Carter was willing to gamble. Too many lives had already been shattered. They couldn't let her slip away. While detectives moved behind the scenes, Claire's world continued its slow collapse. She avoided Rebecca, ignored calls from her family, and stopped showing up at familiar places. She became a ghost in her own life, haunting the spaces she used to fill with laughter and tentative hope. Inside her dorm room, Claire lived in near darkness, curtains perpetually drawn, laptop screen glowing eerily in the gloom. She read articles about the investigation, heart hammering with every new detail revealed. She knew the net was tightening around her, but she couldn't find the strength to run. She didn't want to run anymore. The person she had become, the one who smiled sweetly while ruining lives, felt foreign now, like a bad dream she couldn't fully wake from. Claire thought of Derek constantly, his awkward jokes, the way he looked at her like she mattered. She thought about how, for a brief moment, he made her believe redemption might be possible, but she had poisoned that too. One rainy evening, Claire made her way to the bus stop without thinking, her hoodie pulled tight against the chill. She barely noticed the unmarked car parked across the street, engine idling quietly. Detective Carter watched through the rain-streaked windshield, her fingers tapping the steering wheel. Claire looked defeated, not like the calculating predator the media had portrayed, not like a monster. For a brief moment, Carter hesitated, but the weight of the case, the faces of the victims, their testimonies of betrayal and devastation, anchored her resolve. Claire boarded the bus, unaware that her final act was already set in motion. The next day, Claire received a message through one of her dating profiles, a message from someone calling himself Ryan. The conversation flowed easily. Ryan was charming but not pushy, curious but respectful. He mirrored what Derek had been, enough to draw Claire in, despite the part of her screaming that it was a mistake. They agreed to meet at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Claire chose a seat by the window, fidgeting with the straw in her drink, nerves fraying with every passing second. When Ryan arrived, Claire's first instinct was distrust. Something about his eyes. Too alert, too guarded. But she forced herself to smile, to play the part. Minutes stretched painfully. Claire talked, laughed at the appropriate moments, flirted half-heartedly. And then she caught it. The barely concealed earpiece tucked behind Ryan's collar. Her blood turned to ice. She stood up abruptly, heart racing. "I have to go," she stammered. Ryan reached out gently, trying to keep her seated, but Claire pulled away. The diner door slammed behind her as she bolted into the street, rain pouring in cold sheets. Her feet pounded the pavement, adrenaline roaring through her veins. But it was too late. Unmarked cars screeched around the corner. Officers spilled out, shouting commands. Claire stumbled, slipping in the wet gravel before strong hands pinned her arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked with brutal finality. "Claire Thompson," a voice said over the storm, "you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, aggravated assault, and knowingly exposing others to HIV. Claire didn't struggle. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, soaked and shivering, as the life she had built, the one stitched together with lies and desperation, unraveled completely. As they loaded her into the back of the squad car, Claire caught a glimpse of her reflection in the rain-smeared window. She barely recognized the girl staring back at her. Not a monster, Not a martyr, just a broken soul who had lost her way. Claire Thompson sat in the sterile interrogation room, her hands cuffed to the metal table, her heart hammering in her chest. The fluorescent light above buzzed faintly, casting a cold, unforgiving glow over everything. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second dragging heavier than the last. Detective Linda Carter entered with a manila folder under her arm, setting it down with deliberate weight. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sat across from Claire, studying her with the cool patience of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. Claire met her gaze, trying to summon the mask she used to wear so easily, but it cracked almost instantly. She was too tired, too broken. "We know what you've been doing," Carter said calmly, flipping open the folder to reveal a stack of reports, photographs, victim statements. "You've hurt a lot of people, Claire." Claire lowered her eyes, shame burning hotter than the cuffs cutting into her wrists. "We have hotel records, surveillance footage, online chat logs, witnesses. It's over," Carter continued, her voice low but firm. "But the question is, do you want to make it worse for yourself?" Claire said nothing, her throat too tight to form words. Carter leaned forward slightly. "This is your chance to tell your side of the story." The offer hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Part of Claire wanted to remain silent, to let the system do its worst. She deserved it, didn't she? Every sleepless night, every life she had tainted, she had earned whatever punishment they could throw at her. But another part, a smaller, flickering part, whispered for something else, redemption. A sliver of the girl she used to be, the girl who once believed in forgiveness, in second chances, fought its way to the surface. With trembling hands and a voice barely above a whisper, Claire began to speak. She told them everything, about Ethan Black, about the betrayal, about the diagnosis that shattered her world, about the rage and the despair that consumed her until all she could do was lash out blindly, desperately, trying to claw back a sense of control. She told them about the aliases, the calculated encounters, the growing numbness that turned her heart to stone. Tears streamed down her face, but she forced herself to keep going, to confess every grim detail. By the time she finished, the room was silent, except for the soft hum of the overhead light. Detective Carter closed the file quietly. "You've done terrible things," she said after a long pause, "but you're not beyond saving." Claire blinked at her, startled. "You need help," Carter continued, "not just punishment, help." The legal process moved quickly after that. The evidence was overwhelming, Claire's confession damning but honest. Her lawyer negotiated a deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation and mandatory psychiatric treatment. The trial was brutal. One by one, the victims took the stand, their faces etched with pain and betrayal. They spoke about the night their lives changed forever, about the fear, the shame, the anger. Claire listened to every word, never looking away, never trying to excuse herself. When it was her turn to speak, she stood shakily, gripping the sides of the podium for support. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, voice cracking. "I can't undo what I've done. I know that. But I'm sorry. More than you'll ever know." There was no applause. No softening in the eyes of the people she had hurt. But for the first time, Claire wasn't speaking to win anything. She wasn't manipulating, hiding, or running. She was facing what she had become, and that, in itself, was a kind of victory. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 10, contingent upon good behavior and completion of a court-ordered rehabilitation program. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't absolution, but it was a chance to start climbing out of the pit she had dug for herself. The day Claire was transferred to the correctional facility, she stared out the window of the transport van. Watching the city fade into the distance, she thought of Derek, wondered if he hated her, if he cursed the day they met. She hoped he had moved on. In prison, Claire kept to herself at first. The other inmates sensed her vulnerability and left her alone. She spent hours in the library, devouring books about psychology, trauma, forgiveness. She started seeing a therapist, a stern but kind woman named Dr. Angela Moore, who pushed Claire to confront the depths of her pain without allowing her to hide behind it. It wasn't easy. Some sessions left Claire feeling gutted, raw, and exposed, but slowly, piece by broken piece, she began to rebuild. She joined a writing program, pouring her regrets, fears, and tentative hopes into pages that no one else would ever read. She volunteered for counseling programs aimed at helping newly diagnosed HIV-positive inmates navigate their new realities, offering them the compassion she had once so desperately needed but never received. It was grueling, often heartbreaking work, but it anchored her, gave her a sense of purpose beyond her own survival. Years passed. The girl who once believed revenge would heal her wounds gradually faded away, replaced by a woman who understood that real healing demanded something far more difficult: honesty, humility, and relentless courage. Claire wasn't naive enough to believe she could ever fully undo the damage she had caused, but she could change what came next. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she believed she might actually deserve that chance. News of Claire Thompson's sentencing spread across the country like wildfire. It wasn't just the local stations anymore. National outlets picked up the story, turning it into a symbol of betrayal, public health, and moral outrage. "College student infects dozens in act of revenge," blared one headline. "A cautionary tale about trust and secrecy," declared another. In talk shows, radio stations, podcasts, and social media platforms, everyone had an opinion. Claire's name became shorthand for vengeance gone too far, a chilling warning about how invisible wounds could manifest in devastating ways. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered holding signs that read, "Justice for the victims," and "No sympathy for monsters." The anger was palpable, raw, and righteous. Victims' families wept in interviews, their voices trembling with grief and rage. James Collins, one of Claire's first victims, spoke at a press conference, his voice cracking as he described how the infection had not only ended his marriage, but ruined his relationship with his children. "I trusted her," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I thought it was real, and now everything is broken." For many of the men, the wounds were not just physical, they were spiritual, emotional. Trust, once broken, proved nearly impossible to rebuild. Yet not everyone reacted with pure hatred. Some mental health advocates stepped forward, urging the public to consider the psychological torment Claire must have endured to descend into such darkness. They didn't excuse her actions. No one did, but they challenged the narrative of pure evil. "Pain left untreated can become a weapon," said Dr. Marissa Green, a trauma specialist who appeared on several news programs. Claire Thompson's story is a tragedy on multiple levels. In the online sphere, debates raged fiercely. Some people saw Claire as a calculated predator who deserved no mercy. Others, especially those familiar with the realities of trauma and abuse, saw her as a broken human being who had been consumed by her own suffering. Derek Williams watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling as if he were caught between two worlds. He hadn't spoken to Claire since her arrest. He had given a brief statement to the police, confirming their meetings, but insisting that he had not been harmed. His name, thankfully, had been kept out of the media coverage, but he carried the weight of it every day. He couldn't hate her, no matter how much he tried. He remembered the way she had smiled at the riverfront, the way her laughter had sounded shy and genuine, the way she had looked at him as if he was the only solid thing in a world of shifting lies. It hurt to remember. Derek struggled with guilt for not seeing the signs sooner, guilt for still feeling something for her, even after everything. Sometimes late at night, he wondered if he could have saved her if he had reached out earlier, if he had seen the pain hiding beneath her smiles. But those were foolish thoughts. Claire had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. Rebecca Lewis, Claire's former roommate, was blindsided by the revelation. She gave interviews, her voice shaking as she described the Claire she had known. Quiet, kind, struggling to fit in, but never malicious. "I don't know when she changed," Rebecca admitted. "I don't know if she was always hiding it, or if something snapped. Rebecca faced her own backlash, accused by some of turning a blind eye, of enabling Claire's actions through ignorance. She withdrew from public life, haunted by the thought that maybe, just maybe, she could have made a difference if she had been a better friend. At the university, policies changed almost overnight. Mandatory health education sessions were introduced. Counseling services were expanded. Anonymous reporting systems were bolstered. They couldn't erase what had happened, but they could try to prevent it from happening again. Still, whispers lingered in the halls. Students eyed each other with new wariness, trust replaced by suspicion. The ripple effects reached beyond the campus. Local clinics reported a surge in testing, not just for HIV, but for other sexually transmitted infections. Dating apps saw a dip in new sign-ups. People were slower to meet strangers, slower to trust. It was as if an invisible scar had been carved across the entire community, one that would take years to fully heal, if it ever did. In prison, Claire watched the world react from afar. She saw the news reports, the protests, the debates. She saw the faces of her victims, twisted in pain, played over and over again on television screens she couldn't turn off. Each face was a reminder of what she had done. Each tear was a weight she carried, but she didn't flinch from it, not anymore. Part of her believed she deserved every bit of it, but another part, a small, stubborn part, held on to the hope that she could still be more than the worst thing she had ever done. She worked tirelessly in the prison programs, helping where she could, speaking honestly about her story in support groups, warning others about the dangers of letting pain fester into hatred. Not everyone listened. Some looked at her with disgust, others with pity. But every now and then she saw a flicker of understanding, a recognition of shared brokenness, and it was enough to keep her going. Years would pass, faces would blur, names would fade, but the impact of Claire Thompson's choices, the devastation, the lessons, the sorrow, would linger long after the world moved on. A ghost story whispered across generations. Be careful who you trust. Be careful what pain you bury, because sometimes it doesn't stay buried, and sometimes it comes back to destroy everything. Claire Thompson's story forces an uncomfortable reflection on the human capacity for pain, revenge, and the desperate search for control. Her descent into darkness did not begin with malice. It began with heartbreak, with a betrayal so profound that it shattered the fragile world she had built for herself. But pain, when left unaddressed, becomes a weapon. Claire's actions teach us that unhealed wounds can ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their original source. Her victims were not just strangers, they were echoes of a single moment of betrayal she could never forgive. Instead of seeking help, instead of confronting her anguish, Claire let it fester, allowed it to define her. The tragedy is twofold: the irreversible harm she inflicted on dozens of innocent people, and the destruction of her own humanity in the process. Justice was served in the legal sense, but the larger question lingers. What could have been different? Could a more open conversation about trauma and mental health have saved Claire before she crossed that invisible line? Could someone have seen the warning signs? Could Claire herself have asked for help before she lost herself completely? We often imagine evil as something monstrous, alien, separate from the everyday world we live in. But Claire's story shatters that illusion. Evil, sometimes, is just the slow erosion of a good person who lost their way and convinced themselves there was no turning back. It forces us to recognize that revenge, no matter how justified it may feel in the moment, never heals the original wound. It only spreads the infection further, like a fire consuming everything in its path. Claire wanted the world to hurt as much as she did, and in doing so, she ensured that no one, including herself, would ever truly heal. Her journey is a haunting reminder that unresolved pain doesn't simply disappear. It demands a voice, and if left unheard, it finds a way to scream, sometimes in the most destructive ways imaginable. Forgiveness, difficult as it may be, remains the only true antidote to vengeance. And healing, as messy and imperfect as it is, requires vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to confront the darkness rather than run from it. Claire's story is not just about crime and punishment. It's a mirror, one that challenges us to look at our own scars, our own hidden angers, and to ask, will we choose to heal? Or will we let our pain become a weapon too? In the end, the choice belongs to each of us. Years slipped quietly past the concrete walls and razor-wire fences where Claire Thompson now lived. Prison life was monotonous and punishing, but it also offered her something she hadn't expected: clarity. In a place stripped of distraction and pretense, Claire confronted the person she had become, and the pieces of the person she once was. She immersed herself in counseling programs, both as a participant and later as a mentor. She shared her story in small, sterile rooms filled with women who, like her, had lost themselves somewhere along the way. Some listened, some didn't. Claire spoke anyway. She also completed her education behind bars, earning a degree in psychology through a correspondence program. It was a strange, bittersweet victory, using the tools she had learned too late to better understand the roots of her own downfall. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, life moved on. The university where Claire's story began became a different place. Administrators implemented sweeping changes in their health and counseling services. New awareness programs about sexual health, mental illness, and emotional trauma sprang up, often citing the Claire Thompson case without naming her directly. Among the survivors, healing came slowly, if at all. Some, like James Collins, became vocal advocates for public health reform, using their stories to demand better education and testing accessibility. Others withdrew from public life entirely, choosing to rebuild their shattered trust in the privacy of their families and close circle. Derek Williams quietly transferred to a university in another state, hoping to leave the painful memories behind. But some scars he found traveled with you, no matter how far you ran. He never spoke to Claire again, though sometimes he wondered how she was. If she had found any kind of peace, if the girl he once glimpsed beneath all the lies had survived. Rebecca Lewis eventually graduated and moved to a different city. In interviews, she spoke cautiously about her former friend, always emphasizing the complexity of Claire's character. She wasn't a monster, Rebecca once said. She was a person who made terrible, unforgivable choices. Both things can be true. As for Claire, she continued to serve her sentence year after year, not marking time by the seasons, but by the small personal victories. A completed therapy session, a new book finished, a letter written but never sent. When her 10th year in prison came, Claire became eligible for parole. The hearing was quiet. There were no media circus, no victims' families in the gallery, just Claire, her attorney, the parole board, and the weight of the past. She spoke plainly, without embellishment, about the harm she had caused and the changes she had fought to make within herself. She didn't beg for freedom. She asked only for the chance to continue trying to be better. Against the odds, parole was granted. Claire Thompson walked out of prison into the pale morning light, not as a free woman in the traditional sense, but as someone given the rarest of second chances, the opportunity to rebuild a life from ashes. And somewhere deep inside, she vowed she would not waste it. What do you think about Claire Thompson's story? Was she a villain who deserved every punishment she received, or was she a broken soul, crushed by betrayal, who lost her way trying to survive her pain? Stories like Claire's leave no easy answers, only uncomfortable questions about justice, forgiveness, and the human heart's capacity for darkness and redemption. We want to hear what you think. Do you believe there could have been another path for Claire? Could intervention, compassion, or a different support system have saved her from the choices she made? Or are some wounds simply too deep to heal without consequences that ripple far beyond ourselves? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about what this case teaches us. Not just about crime and punishment, but about vulnerability, trauma, and the responsibility we all carry when dealing with pain, whether it's our own or someone else's. And if this story moved you, shocked you, or made you see the world a little differently, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that reveal the hidden struggles behind seemingly ordinary lives. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. Sometimes the greatest dangers we face are the ones we can't see, the ones growing quietly inside wounded hearts. Don't forget to hit the like button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that will leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for being here with us. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay aware.